introduce Dr. Rajeev Kumar. He is currently a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi, and also Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Economics and Politics in Pune, and is one of our most distinguished economists and policy analysts and commentators, as most of you would know from following his writings in the press and media. And he is the author of several books on the Indian economy and India's national security, and has a PhD from Lucknow University and a DPhil in economics from Oxford. So today he will speak, the subject he will speak on is India-Pakistan bilateral relations, key for regional cooperation in South Asia. So with that introduction, which he really doesn't need, being so distinguished, I will hand the floor to Dr. Rajeev Kumar.
Thank you very much, Sridharan, and thank you, Mahesh, for asking me to speak on this. Great privilege to be here. I remember having come here, I think, 8 years ago, or longer actually, and so this has been a long gap, but it's a great pleasure always to be back at Teen Murthy for the seminar series. It is absolutely true that India's foreign policy, whether it's neighborhood policy or its Look East policy or whatever its relations with Japan or US, have to be determined by its national interests, its core national interests as it defined, which is what he read out to be. There's a book that I co-authored. It was titled In the National Interest, coming out of a project which the MEA had funded over 3 years, and we wrote about sort of something like 30 papers to come to that. So I am not, I hope I am not called one of the romantists or peaceniks and things like that. Please do have a look at that book to see that I do know and I realize that India's national interests must be served by its actually foreign or by any policy, foreign or domestic policy, etc. The second thing, though, I must sort of point out here is that in another book which I co-authored with Admiral Rajya Menon, which is called The Long View from Delhi, which is the only net assessment of the world from an Indian perspective, Indian point of view, we make the point that policy, foreign policy especially, has to be done in a strategic framework, in a long-term framework. There are no knee-jerk reactions. You might sort of, deal with firefighting, or you might have sort of, short-term objectives in domestic policy quite often, but foreign policy especially has to have a longer-term view, and that is, and you have to take the steps required for that. So that's the preamble. Given that, given the framework, the necessary framework of India's national interest, my argument is as follows, that today, unlike earlier, regional integration in South Asia and a smaller part of it, regional economic cooperation in South Asia, is in India's vital self-interest. And I'll elaborate on it afterwards as I go along. I'm just outlining my argument at the moment. Is in vital interest, of India's vital interest, so that the position that India held between 1985 to about 2002, that SAARC is merely a ganging up of smaller neighbors to browbeat India, is no more true. It was that position that India had taken, but it has changed that position quite dramatically, and now even the official policy recognizes that it is in India's national interest. The South Asian regional integration goes ahead at a more rapid pace than at a slower pace. Second, that if you want to achieve that, any idea that a SAARC -1 or a South Asia -1 can succeed is misplaced. There have been attempts at that, but you cannot, I don't think you will get a South Asian regional integration if, as in the past, the largest neighbor component, India, or now, as it is argued sometimes, the second largest component, Pakistan, is left out of that. So that is why I say that now if you want to take this forward, you have to have Pakistan engaged in South Asia. Third point is that if you want to have Pakistan engaged in South Asia, given South Asia's geography, given South Asia's history, and given the importance of the relation between the two countries, India and Pakistan, the two largest economies of South Asia, unless Indo-Pakistan bilateral relations improve, you cannot achieve the objective of engaging Pakistan in South Asia, and which is why you can't really get progress in South Asian regional integration So India-Pakistan bilateral relations have to be improved before we can go on to the successive phases. And finally, that if we recognize this, if that argument is valid, then India will have to lay out a three-pronged strategy, which I will not elaborate just now, so as to keep a little bit of the sort of suspense, as it were, towards the end. India will have to adopt a three-pronged strategy to improve the Indo-Pakistan bilateral relations, and that will then serve India's national interest in the long run, as I have sort of outlined to you just now. That's the core of my argument, and now let me now detail some of these features. On South Asia, the fact is that South Asia remains one of the least integrated regions of the world. Even if you take informal trade into account or third country trade into account, which is exports from India through Dubai, etc., or smuggling, less than 6%, some people would say even 5% of total trade of South Asia is accounted for by intra-regional trade. Less than 5%, and this figure is, for example, something like closer to 60%, 48% in ASEAN and 60% in EU, etc. And even in some of the sub-Saharan, SADC countries, etc., the intra-regional trade is larger than 5%. This lack of integration in South Asia means that several very important challenges of our region cannot be addressed because those are beyond being addressed by individual countries. I mean, these would be, of course, very natural ones like environment, trafficking, water, and you can even think of, some of the other issues here that, apart from the fact that less integration and greater confrontation in this region means that, as somebody said, I think, I forget who, but that you spend resources in fighting the wrong enemy, while your real enemy is the poverty in this whole region, which is the largest concentration of poverty, I suppose, now anywhere in the world, even more than sub-Saharan Africa. In that context, India's own development and India's own aspirations of being a member or of having a seat at the global governance, of high table of global governance, will not be served if this region is seen as one which is not only not integrated, but which is in conflict, or which is a region where you have imminent sort of dangers of nuclear conflagration, or etc., etc. Because having lived in Manila for about 10 years, I noticed that other Asians think of South Asians as bringing some sort of a dissonance into the system rather than more coherence and cooperation. So India, if it wants to be a leading global power, as I just heard recently our Foreign Secretary talk about it, India's aspirations of a leading global power will not be served if it is unable to convert this region into one of peace, prosperity, and stability. So that is why. Second, that being 83% of the economy, of South Asian economy, about 80% of its population, and located where it is, whereby only Afghanistan and Pakistan are the two other countries which have a common border, the rest have only borders with India. India's role in South Asian regional integration is central. Not just central, it is primary. And India, having changed its positions after, I think, 2004 or 2, but most remarkably after 2007, where India was host to the 14th, I think, SAARC summit, India will have to take the lead and take on the principal responsibility of South Asian regional integration. And that is a big change, and that's a big assertion I'm making here, which is that from a position whereby you felt that only bilateral relations are good enough, and that South Asia was too small for India, which is what some people have argued in the past, and now the situation must be that this region of approximately 1.6 billion people, growing to about 2.7 billion people in the next 20-30 years, must be India's principal responsibility in terms of its integration, which will be the necessary condition almost for this region's growth and prosperity. And finally here, that given that China has now declared open game, open season for South Asia, and that it is now it is unambiguously clear, has made it unambiguously clear that it is looking towards South Asian markets and South Asia as for its own manufactured exports and as a region of its influence. If India has to contest China in South Asia and keep this space in some sense an Indo-centric space, then India will have to take on the principal responsibility of South Asian integration, and therefore in the longer strategic interest, it may need to sacrifice some immediate interest to achieve that. So that is the question about South Asia and India's own responsibility. The next point, the next issue is, yes, of course it can be done, and we accept this, but why not without Pakistan? Because it is said that Pakistan would be, would not, you don't need it because after all it is on our western flank, and therefore you can have a South Asian regional integration without Pakistan. The fact is that this has been tried, and the principle of unanimity, which is the framework of SAARC, which was inherent, embodied in the framework of SAARC, was to some extent given up in about I think early 2000, when it was agreed that member countries which do not agree to participate in any project could opt out while letting other member countries continue with that project. And this led to the birth of an ADB sponsored program called SASEC. Now I don't know the full form, but it is South Asia Southeast Cooperation program, which resulted in what is called a sort of cooperation quadrangle between India, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal. And the idea was that you could have sub-regional cooperation, and then it could lead to the sort of regional cooperation, to a larger regional cooperation. That, I'm afraid, hadn't worked. And if you notice, if you look at the details of SASEC, which is on ADB's website, you will see that SASEC has so far not been able to bring about any genuinely regional project. I mean, yeah, they've got north-south highways and they've got border infrastructure, etc., but these are all national projects, and none of them is sub-regional projects. The second point, of course, is that with Pakistan out of the picture, you would have Afghanistan essentially out of South Asia, because you need the transit, sort of arrangements through Pakistan. And with those two countries out, South Asia's connectivity to Central Asia would also be greatly harmed. And with the second largest economy out of the reckoning of South Asian regional integration, the very term would have much less significance, or would have less, would not mean as much as with Pakistan inside it. Therefore, I now come to the third point, which is that given this context, if we agree to the fact that Pakistan is integral to South Asian regional integration, how should India approach Pakistan and its relations with Pakistan? Because, as I said, without improving this relationship, it will be very difficult, because all of Pakistan's integration with South Asian markets, South Asian environment, South Asian waters, etc., is directly dependent upon and contingent upon its relationship with India. So therefore, Indo-Pakistan bilateral relations would have to be improved if Pakistan has to be brought into the South Asian framework. Both in India and in Pakistan, the improvement in bilateral relations is always given sort of top billing, as it were. The Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Prime Minister Modi have both expressed at different points of time the fact that better relations, and I'm not, and this was very clear, of course, of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and before that Prime Minister Gilani, Mr. Zardari, etc. Campaigns in Pakistan, political campaigns, have been fought on the basis of improved relations with India. And also in India, there is a large reservoir of sentiment which will say that improving relations with Pakistan is something that is desirable. So given those two, the third point that here that I would want to make is that if we assume that this is true, that my argument is valid, that Pakistan is not going away, and that India and Pakistan leaderships, I'm not talking about, we'll come to that later, about the general public, etc. The leaderships do desire a better relationship between the two countries, then I think we need to look at what are the measures that can be taken to achieving this in a realistic way. For India, it will be important to look at different stakeholders in Pakistan. Different stakeholders in Pakistan, which is, and if you divide them, it could be like in our country, it would be the civil society, it will be the political parties, it will be the business people, and it will be the armed forces. These are the four different stakeholders that you've got in Pakistan. And you will have to maybe determine as to what your approach or your strategy towards each of those stakeholders could be going forward. So India, the first step that India would have to therefore take, and this is the first suggestion that I make of the three-pronged strategy, is to change the narrative in the public domain in South Asia, which is that in South Asia, there is pretty much zero talk of South Asian integration. If you ask anybody outside this building, anywhere, that what is SAARC or South Asian regional integration, and I'm reminded of a piece written by Nikhil Chakravarti in 1985 when the first SAARC summit took place, and by Sumanto Banerjee, that as long as SAARC is confined to the official corridors and meeting rooms, it would have no meaning to the people of this region. Unfortunately, that is what has happened so far. And whose responsibility would it be to change this? I think from what I had argued earlier, it is clearly going to be India's responsibility to change the public narrative about South Asia and about Indo-Pakistan relations going forward. I think the part of the same strategy would be that, and this is a project that I have started and I've spent 1 year on it, is to improve relations between India's border states and its countries across the border, which is the only way you can make the borders places where different countries meet or different people meet, rather than people separate. And this can achieve actually huge results. So Punjab to Punjab, Sindh to Gujarat, Sindh to Rajasthan, Karachi, Mumbai, keeping only to the Pakistan of it. If those relationships improve, and there is a much bigger chance of their improving, and there's a much bigger stake of the provincial governments in improving those relationships, I think the public narrative would begin to change. The second prong that I suggest is unilateral concessions by India on economic and commercial front to Pakistan. And I have followed with great sort of in depth all that has happened in the last 10 years, and in the Commerce Secretary's level talks, etc., etc. The specific thing that I want to make is the follows in this unilateral concessions. The first, by the way, here let me just give you a couple of figures, which is that currently India's Indo-Pakistan bilateral trade officially is about $2.7 billion only, and of this, I think Pakistan exports $480 billion, and we export to them about $1.8 billion. Plus, there are all the exports that India does via Dubai, which adds to this 2.7 and may even double this whole amount, and that is largely one way from India to Pakistan and not the other way. So India enjoys a huge surplus of trade with Pakistan currently. Completing the electricity sale to Pakistan, a 500 megawatt grid connection on our western border was already in the pipeline. It was to be supported by the World Bank. Somewhere the file is stuck. Something should be done, and India should take a proactive stance in completing this electricity sale, because at this point of time, Pakistan's energy shortage is critical. And I think this would be a huge step if India can start exporting. And India is currently, lo and behold, surplus in some regions of our electricity. It will be a huge step in creating a better, goodwill and a better feeling towards India. And similarly, there is again a lot of work has been done on petroleum product exports to Pakistan from India. Pakistan has to ship all its petroleum products from its ports in Karachi, and I don't know whether it's in Gwadar from also or not, up country, up to the north. And we have pipelines, and we are now creating a refinery in Panipat, and it would be much easier and be cheaper for Pakistan to import petroleum products from us, and our refinery capacities in Panipat, etc. have that. I know of businessmen in Pakistan who are actually trying to clinch this deal, but hasn't happened so far. So that's the second thing that we could do without waiting for the NDMA coming from Pakistan. The third thing that we can do, of course, is that there was a working group on removing non-tariff barriers from industries which are of great relevance to Pakistan, like leather, sports, textiles, and so on. The recommendations of that working group should be implemented as soon as possible, so that Pakistan exports could be, in those areas could be scaled. And so, friends, this is the three strong strategy that I suggest to improving Indo-Pakistan bilateral relations, which, to repeat, are, in my view, critical to bringing, or a necessary condition to bringing Pakistan into the South Asian regional cooperation, and which South Asian regional cooperation, regional integration is, in my view, of critical importance for serving India's national interest at this point of time. Thank you very much.